today, we want to come to the fifth quality of Abdu'l-Baha. What would you call the foundation of something? What is the foundation? When you build a house, what do you build first? You have the foundation. What is the cornerstone of a foundation? It's like the first part of the first part, isn't it? The cornerstone of the foundation, it's the most important part of the most important part, the cornerstone of the foundation. And the thing we want to talk about today is the cornerstone of the foundation of all Baha'i activity. Here's a statement from the Universal House of Justice, and I quote, "The cornerstone of the foundation of all Baha'i activity is teaching the cause." In fact, Abdu'l-Baha went so far as to say it was the most important of all things. He said in his will and testament, "Guidance of the nations and peoples of the world is the most important of all things." And then he went on to add, "Of all the gifts of God, the greatest is the gift of teaching." So I had to choose this as one of the qualities of Abdu'l-Baha, but we don't want to talk about the importance of teaching. We all know this. We want to find out, how did Abdu'l-Baha teach? In what way did he teach? Now, have any of you ever tried to do something and use the wrong tool? Have you ever had the wrong tool? Maybe you were trying to hammer in a nail, but you only had a screwdriver and you're pounding it with a screwdriver. It's so hard when you have the wrong tool, and it's so easy, so deceptively easy when you have the right tool. And Abdu'l-Baha had the right tools for teaching, and we can learn what they are by studying the way in which he taught and how we can do the same things that he did. So I took all the stories I could find about Abdu'l-Baha when he was teaching and the ways in which he taught and things of that nature. And I came up with an analysis of what I found to be 6 principles, 6 basic principles that if we could learn to follow these principles, we could also teach like Abdu'l-Baha. First one is to get your fill. The second is you need to consult the FBI. Third is you need to have the right DNA. Absolutely essential. You have to have the right. You cannot teach the faith if you don't have the right DNA. The fourth is you need to be bad. You need to be bad. Absolutely. You cannot teach like Abdu'l-Baha if you can't learn to be bad. Number 5 is you need to find the Bab. The most important one probably of all, the 6th one, you need to talk like hell. You need to talk like hell. If you can learn these 6, you too can teach like Abdu'l-Baha. You need to get your fill. You need to consult the FBI. You need to have the right DNA. You need to be bad. You need to find the Bab, and you need to talk like hell. Let's begin by talking about teaching with a story told by Haji Mirza Haydar Ali when he was in the mansion of Baji and Baha'u'llah himself started to talk about teaching. And the remarkable thing about this is that Baha'u'llah was explaining how we should teach. And as he was explaining it, he then turned and said, "Consider how Abdu'l-Baha teaches," and pointed out the way in which Abdu'l-Baha taught. Baha'u'llah could have just told us how to teach. He's a manifestation of God. But even he felt the need to show the example of Abdu'l-Baha, that sometimes words are not enough, that you need to see the example. Haji Mirza Haydar Ali says, "I went to his room in the mansion of Baji, and he spoke about teaching. He said, 'A kindly approach and loving behavior toward the people are the first requirements for teaching the cause.'" And right there I'm thinking, a kindly approach and loving behavior, not knowledge, not wisdom, not facts, not intelligence, not eloquence. The first requirements are love and a kindly approach. That's interesting in itself, isn't it? And Baha'u'llah continues. He says, "The teacher must carefully listen to whatever a person has to say, even though his talk may consist of only vain imaginings and blind repetitions of the opinions of others." And now I'm getting even more confused. I thought that teaching was me speaking and them listening. And Baha'u'llah says the teacher must be the listener. The teacher must carefully listen to whatever a person has to say. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, if they've got something good to say, I'll listen to them. He says, must carefully listen to whatever a person has to say, even though his talk may consist only of vain imaginings and blind repetitions of others. And so this is very interesting because it completely changes my idea of what teaching is. The first requirement is love and kindly approach. And the first thing you do is you have to listen. That's the first requirement. So I said, okay, if Baha'u'llah says the first thing you have to do is love and listen, then you have to get your fill. And that means first I listen and love. Let's say that. What does fill stand for? First I listen and love. Every time we go teaching, we need to say to ourselves, what is the first thing I'm going to do? What is the very first thing I'm going to do? The first thing I'm going to do is listen to the person and love the person. Usually when we go teaching, we're thinking, well, what am I going to say? That's what we're thinking. And Baha'u'llah, he completely changes this. He says, these are the first requirements for teaching. Now, how do you love a person? We already talked about this. There's only one way, Abdu'l-Baha said, to love a person, and that's to find the beauty inside that person. If you can't find the beauty inside the person, you can't love them. You have to look for God in them. You have to look for the beauty. That's why you need to consult the FBI, because FBI stands for Find the Beauty Inside. Find the beauty inside. These are the first two requirements according to Baha'u'llah. Now Baha'u'llah continues. He says this, one should not resist or engage in argument. The teacher must avoid disputes which will end in stubborn refusal or hostility, because the other person will feel overpowered and defeated. Therefore, he will be more inclined to reject the cause. One should rather say, maybe you are right, but kindly consider the question from this other point of view. Consideration, respect, and love encourage people to listen and do not force them to respond with hostility. They are convinced because they see that your purpose is not to defeat them, but to convey truth, to manifest courtesy, and to show forth heavenly attributes. This will encourage the people to be fair. Their spiritual natures will respond, and by the bounty of God, they will find themselves recreated. And so now Baha'u'llah says, one must not resist or engage in argument. And this is our natural tendency. When we hear somebody say something that we feel is not right, perhaps we know it's not right because it's counter to the words of God, we feel the tendency to have to correct them or have to say what the right thing is. And Baha'u'llah says, don't do that. Do not resist. Do not engage in argument. Rather, try to get them to see it from a different point of view. This is such an important principle that Baha'u'llah is talking about, because you have to understand that everybody is right according to their own frame of reference. And so Baha'u'llah is saying you can't change somebody's opinion of something, but you can change their frame of reference. And thereby their opinion will automatically change. That's why he says, kindly consider this from a different point of view. And so you would have to agree that if you want to be the right teacher, you have to have the right DNA. And DNA stands for do not argue. That's what, just say to yourself, I need to have the DNA of a teacher. The DNA of a teacher is that I do not argue. First, I get my fill. First, I listen and love. Second, I find the beauty inside the person by consulting the FBI. And third, I have the right DNA. I do not argue. Let's go back to Baha'u'llah in the mansion of Baji. Consider the way in which the master teaches the people. He listens very carefully to the most hollow and senseless talk. He listens so intently that the speaker says to himself, he is trying to learn from me. Then the master gradually and very carefully, by means that the other person does not perceive, puts him on the right path and endows him with a fresh power of understanding. This is Baha'u'llah's description of Abdu'l-Baha's method of teaching, that he listens to the most hollow and senseless talk. Furthermore, he listens so much so that the person says, he's trying to learn from me. And by the way, this is in many stories of Abdu'l-Baha, that people came away and said, I felt as if I was teaching him, that he was learning from me. How did Abdu'l-Baha give people that impression? How did he do it? Because he really was. He really was learning from these people. He wasn't just pretending to listen and nodding his head and thinking, oh my God, this is hollow and senseless. No, he was listening, and there was a very good reason why he was listening. We're going to figure that one out too. And then Baha'u'llah says he listens, and then gradually, by means that the person does not perceive, puts him on the right path. And the way in which Abdu'l-Baha did this is he had some secret weapons. Secret weapons that he was able to use, that if we used, we would also be able to do this. Let's look at these weapons. The first is the weapon of kindliness. Kindliness has magic powers. Baha'u'llah says, should anyone among you be incapable of grasping a certain truth or be striving to comprehend it, show forth when conversing with him a spirit of extreme kindliness and goodwill. Now, what he's saying here is extreme kindliness. And I love the way Baha'u'llah says extreme kindliness. Baha'u'llah just couldn't say kindliness. He says, when you teach, you have to teach with extreme kindliness. And then Baha'u'llah makes a warning. He warns us against something. And anytime Baha'u'llah says beware, we should all be shaking. We should all be scared, like in a horror movie, because you know something's going to happen. And Baha'u'llah says beware. He warns us. He says, beware lest ye deal unkindly with him. And then he makes one of the most remarkable statements I have read in his writings. He compares kindliness to 4 different things in one sentence. 4 analogies that are so powerful that I cannot believe them. He says, a kindly tongue is the lodestone of the hearts of men. It is the bread of the Spirit. It clotheth the words with meaning. It is the fountain of the light of wisdom and understanding. And I'm thinking, good job, Baha'u'llah. 4 analogies in one sentence. And what powerful analogies. First of all, he's comparing kindliness to a magnet. A lodestone, of course, is a naturally magnetic stone. And what are the powers of a magnet? They attract. And now he's saying that kindliness attracts. Not knowledge, not wisdom, not the facts, just the kindliness has a force of attraction. A magnet, what does it attract? It attracts metallic objects or magnetic objects. He says this is a magnet of the hearts. And now he's saying kindliness is the bread of the Spirit. It's food for the Spirit. And I would have thought that it wasn't the kindliness, it was the words or the facts or the knowledge or the wisdom that fed the Spirit. And he's saying that kindness itself is the food. It's the bread of the Spirit. Then he says, it clotheth the words with meaning. And I'm saying, hold on. I thought words had meaning in and of themselves. You look in the dictionary, this is the meaning of the words. And Baha'u'llah says, no, the words have no meaning if they have no kindliness. The kindness actually gives meaning to the words. So if you really wanted to make something more meaningful, you wouldn't go more forceful, you would go more kindly. It's kindliness that gives meaning to the words. And then finally, he compares it to water. He says, it is the fountain of the light of wisdom and understanding. And water is life-giving. And now he compares it to water. So I'm saying, Baha'u'llah, is kindliness really this powerful? Kindliness is a secret weapon that Abdu'l-Baha used every time. And not just kindliness, let's say it fast. Extreme kindliness. In fact, Shoghi Effendi says, let us remember the example set by Abdu'l-Baha and his constant admonition to shower such kindness upon the seeker and to exemplify to such a degree the spirit of the teachings he hopes to instill in him that the recipient will be spontaneously impelled to identify himself with the cause. And I thought this is interesting. He doesn't say, to shower such knowledge and such wisdom and all the teachings and all the things. Shower such kindness upon the person. Let's look at two other secret weapons of Abdu'l-Baha. And these two weapons are lowliness and humility. For some reason, lowliness and humility have powers that we do not realize. It's ironic because you think that lowliness and humility is the lack of power. But in fact, if you read what Abdu'l-Baha says, you'll find that these two things have enormous power. Humility means that you don't consider yourself very powerful or great or important, but lowliness means you place yourself in life in a low position. There are some people that don't think they're so great themselves, but they still place themselves in high positions. Okay, and there's other people that they may be in a low position in life, but they think they're great. Do you see? These are two different things, lowliness and humility. So Abdu'l-Baha always, he says humble and lowly in his prayers. He often, these are like two sides of a coin, that we need to both be humble and place ourselves in a lowly position. Now Abdu'l-Baha says, in accordance with the divine teachings, in this glorious dispensation, we should not belittle anyone and call him ignorant, saying, you know not, but I know. Rather, we should look upon others with respect, and when attempting to explain and demonstrate, we should speak as if we are investigating the truth, saying, here these things are before us. Let us investigate to determine where and in what form the truth can be found. The teacher should not consider himself as learned and others ignorant. Such a thought breeds pride, and pride is unconducive to influence. The teacher should not see in himself any superiority. He should speak with the utmost kindliness, lowliness, and humility, for such speech exerts influence and educates souls. Extreme kindliness, lowliness, and humility. Those are the three secret weapons. Abdu'l-Baha just told you the three. So basically what he's saying is that when you talk, you need to talk like hell. Because when you talk like hell, humility, extreme kindliness, lowliness, and love. That's it. Every time you open your mouth, think, am I talking like hell? Do I have humility? Do I have extreme kindness? That's why I like the E, the extreme part of it. Do I have lowliness and do I have love? When I was reading this quotation where Abdu'l-Baha was basically saying talk like hell, he said an interesting thing. He said that if you think you're superior to the person, then you will have some pride. And as soon as you have pride, you are not able to influence the person. That basically you take meaning away from the words the same way that when you're unkindly. And so when I thought about that, I said, oh, basically what Abdu'l-Baha is saying is there are certain ways that you can take meaning away from words. I thought that was interesting. So I went back and read the quotations and found that there's exactly 9 ways in which you can take meaning away from words. So I wrote them down, and in case any of you ever want to take meaning away from the words, here are the 9 things that you can do. The first thing you can do is say it with pride. Say it with pride. It doesn't matter if the thing you're saying is true. It could be absolutely true. It could be the Word of God. But go ahead and say it with pride, and you took the meaning away from the Word of God. 2, say it in a way that makes you appear superior. 3, say it in a way that makes you appear to have greater endowments, greater intelligence, or greater knowledge. How often do we say things, or people say things in such a way that the subtext is, I know more than you, I have more knowledge, I'm more intelligent than you. 4, say it in a way that makes the other person feel inferior. Number 5, say it in a way that makes the other person appear to have less intelligence or less knowledge. Number 6, say it without kindliness. Number 7, say it when it is beyond their current capacity. Number 8, say it in a way that it is threatening to them. And lastly, number 9 is say it before first removing what Abdu'l-Baha calls estrangement. Abdu'l-Baha says that you should not speak until you have removed certain barriers of what he calls estrangement. Let me read this to you. He says, souls are liable to estrangement. Such methods should be adopted that the estrangement should be first removed. Then the word will have effect. You know that when you meet people, at first you have certain barriers, but once you get to know them and they become your friend, there's a certain difference that comes. And Abdu'l-Baha says you need to do this first. So these are 9 ways that you can take meaning away from words. Now, have you noticed that so far I have not said anything about what we should say when we teach? So, how important is speech and what you say to teaching? In relation to the overall process of teaching, where would you rate speech? So here's Abdu'l-Baha, and he's talking about teaching. And he says, teaching the cause of God is not only through the tongue. So now we know that speech is not the only part of teaching. He says it is not only through the tongue, it is, and let's just count the things that he says. It is through deeds, a good disposition, happiness of nature, kindness and sympathy, good fellowship, trustworthiness, holiness, virtue, purity of ideals, and lastly, speech. Lastly, speech. And that word lastly, I didn't add that. That's in Abdu'l-Baha's text. He listed 9 things and then said, and lastly, speech. And think about those 9 things and think about what's not even in those 9 things. There's not knowledge, there's not eloquence, there's not information. They don't even make the top 10. Abdu'l-Baha says that there is a certain quality of teaching that he defined using various terms, and Baha'u'llah also talked about it, and I want to give you these 3 terms, and I think of them all kind of as synonymous. One is the term wisdom, and another is the term moderation, and another is the concept of teaching according to the capacity of the person. Okay, but all 3 of these are really different ways of saying the same thing. For example, Abdu'l-Baha says, under all conditions, the message must be delivered, but with wisdom. And he says, okay, you should teach, but you need to teach a certain way and not another way, and it's with wisdom. And you say, well, what do you mean by wisdom? And then he explains the meaning of wisdom in this context. He says, not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor can everything that he can disclose be regarded as timely, nor can every timely utterance be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. Such is the consummate wisdom to be observed in thy pursuits. So what is he saying here? He's saying, first of all, that you cannot say everything you know. You know a lot of things, and when you're talking to someone, you have to choose out of all the things you know, which things you can say, because you obviously can't say everything you know. He says, however, from the things that you know that you can also say, not everything is timely. Not everything, it's not the right time to say it doesn't come up in the conversation, it's just not the right time. And so you think, okay, well then whatever is timely I will say out of what I know. And Abdu'l-Baha warns you against the timely utterance. He warns you against the timely utterance. He says not every timely utterance can be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. Basically what he's saying is that the only thing you should be thinking about is not whether or not you know it, not whether or not you have the time to say it, not whether or not it's the right time to say it because it comes in the but only whether or not it is suited to the capacity of the person. That is our only criteria. When you utter something beyond someone's capacity, you may think, well, I'm not doing any harm. But Baha'u'llah makes a very scary statement. You thought that beware lest ye deal unkindly with people was scary. No, this is the scariest statement in the entire Baha'i revelation, in my opinion. I'm scared to death. I don't even want to read it to you. So I want you all to brace yourselves. I'm going to read you a statement from Baha'u'llah that's going to scare you. He says, moderation is indeed highly desirable. Every person who in some degree turneth towards the truth can himself later comprehend most of what he seeketh. However, if at the outset a word is uttered beyond his capacity, he will refuse to hear it and will arise in opposition. And I'm saying, oh my goodness, are you telling me, Baha'u'llah, that if I disobey this law of speaking beyond their capacity, I can not just not bring them to the faith, but turn them against the faith? And that's what Baha'u'llah is saying. He says, you, by your teaching, the intent to attract people to the faith, can do the exact opposite. In fact, Shoghi Effendi said in one of his passages about this subject that spiritual digestion is exactly the same as physical digestion. He said there's a parallel. And he says when you give food that's too much or too rich to someone, he says it only causes mal-assimilation and rejection. There's another thing that Abdu'l-Baha did, a technique that Abdu'l-Baha used with everyone, and that's that he built a bridge. Abdu'l-Baha built bridges with people. This is why he listened to people. This is why he listened. Now, I'm going to read a story. It's in one of the Ruhi books. And it says here, there was a Christian merchant who found that the Baha'is had some good charcoal, so they just took it from the Baha'i. Just took it because that's what they did. You know, Baha'is were just free to take things from. And Abdu'l-Baha decided to go and demand for the return of the charcoal. So it says Abdu'l-Baha went to the place of this merchant, and he sat there and waited. And he waited and he waited for more than 3 hours. People came and went, and nobody paid any attention to Abdu'l-Baha, but he just sat there. It says, there were many people about in that office, bent on their trade. They took no notice of Abdu'l-Baha. He sat, he waited. 3 hours passed before the merchant finally came to him and said, are you one of the prisoners in this town? Abdu'l-Baha said, yes. And he said, what was the crime for which you were imprisoned? Okay, who can guess the bridge? Can anyone guess the bridge? But have you know the story? Okay, then you didn't guess the bridge. Abdu'l-Baha said, the same crime for which Christ was indicted. The merchant was taken aback. He was a Christian. You see, a Christian in Palestine in those days was quite unusual. And Abdu'l-Baha said the same crime. And so he says, what could you possibly know of Christ? So Abdu'l-Baha very calmly and patiently explained to him his belief in Christ. It says here, the arrogance of the merchant was confronted by the patience of Abdu'l-Baha. And finally, when Abdu'l-Baha rose to go, the merchant also rose and walked with him into the street, betokening his respect for the man, one of the detested prisoners, and from then on, he was a friend, even a stout supporter of the Baha'is. Now, this is very interesting because Abdu'l-Baha knew that he was a Christian. And yet, Abdu'l-Baha got it so that the man asked him the question. The man asked him the question. He got the man to build the bridge. Isn't that clever? And so, but he just dropped in the old Jesus Christ there. And then the man said, well, what could you know? And then the Abdu'l-Baha just answered it. The man thought he was controlling the conversation. And in the end, this man became a supporter. He didn't go and say, you thief, you charcoal-stealing, merchant that hates Baha'is. No, he went and mentioned Jesus because he built a bridge. How hard is this to do? All you need to do is be sensitive. So the point is that any time you teach someone, the first thing you need to do when you're listening is you're trying to find the Bab. And of course, what does the Bab stand for? Build a bridge. The Bab stands for build a bridge. That's why Abdu'l-Baha is listening so intently and so carefully at the outset. That's why he's wakeful and attentive in his early intercourse, because he's looking for the bridge. Would you agree with that? Is there anything else we don't know yet in this? Oh, you gotta be bad. You've got to be bad. Abdu'l-Baha said that when someone teaches, one must be like a physician. He says, first diagnose the disease and identify the malady, then prescribe the remedy. For such is the method of a skillful physician. If you went to a doctor and before you told them what was wrong with you, they immediately were giving you medication, how good a doctor would you think that is? Or if you went to a doctor, they gave you medication, and then you found out that every other patient, no matter what illness they had, they gave them exactly the same medication. Okay. And yet, how often do we do this? When someone says, what is the Baha'i faith? And immediately we're prescribing the medication. Or maybe we give the same medication to every single person we see. And Abdu'l-Baha says, no, you must first diagnose. So if you want to teach, you have to be bad. What does bad stand for? Be a doctor. You have to say these things over and over again to yourself. First, I listen and love that person. Second, find the beauty inside the person, the FBI. Next, have the right DNA. Do not argue or resist anything. We have to figure out how we can change their point of view. We're going to talk about that in a minute. 4, be bad. That's absolutely essential. We have to be a doctor. Can you be a doctor without first listening? No. Next, we have to find the Bab. We have to build a bridge. And if we do those first 5 things, then finally we're able to speak. Finally. Why do you think I put talk last? I put it last because it's the last thing. You have to do these other first 5 first. Then finally when you talk, okay, now you're allowed to talk, but you must talk like hell. You must talk with humility, extreme kindness, lowliness, and love. I found over and over again in all my studies of Abdu'l-Baha that he taught with analogy. He constantly taught with analogy. It was so interesting to me that this was Abdu'l-Baha's method. He was so quick to find a way to convey truth by analogy. And I remember a very interesting thing. Abdu'l-Baha had to comfort 2 parents who lost a child. I can't think of anything more devastating, more painful than parents that see the passing of their young child. And yet Abdu'l-Baha had to comfort them. And he wrote a letter to them. And he said, "O ye 2 patient souls, your letter was received. The death of that beloved youth and his separation from you have caused the utmost sorrow and grief." And so I'm thinking, how is Abdu'l-Baha going to comfort them? And he says this. He says, "The inscrutable divine wisdom underlieth such heart-rendering occurrences. It is as if a kind gardener transferreth a fresh and tender shrub from a confined place to a wide open area. This transfer is not the cause of the withering, the lessening, or the destruction of that shrub. Nay, on the contrary, it maketh it to grow and thrive, acquire freshness and delicacy, become green and bear fruit. This hidden secret is well known to the gardener, but those souls who are unaware of this bounty suppose that the gardener in his anger and wrath hath uprooted the shrub. Yet to those who are aware, this concealed fact is manifest, and this predestined decree is considered a bounty. Do not feel grieved or disconsolate, therefore, at the ascension of that bird of faithfulness." Isn't that a beautiful way to comfort a parent? He told them a story, an analogy, about taking a plant, and the gardener transplants it from a confined area to an area where it can grow and thrive. And here, then, the truth they see in the analogy, and they can apply it to themselves. But if Abdu'l-Baha had written, "Oh, you 2 parents who lost your son, get over it, it's the will of God," or something like that directly, the truth could not be born. Because Abdu'l-Baha realized that sometimes truth has to be isolated from directly threatening a person. You isolate truth and you explain it over here, then they can see the truth and apply it to themselves. This is the power of analogy. This is what I think Baha'u'llah means by see things from another point of view. In other words, don't be threatening to the person. Now, Abdu'l-Baha was very quick to analogy. For example, when he wanted to talk about the equality of men and women, he said 2 wings of a bird. 2 wings of a bird. 5 syllables. And yet, every Baha'i will mention those anytime they talk about equality of men and women. It says more than a paragraph. It says more than pages or even books. Just those 5 words, because it has such power. And it's also separating the truth into another area. If I talk to a man and say, "You need to be nicer to your wife," or "You need to employ more women," or "You need to," it's too threatening. Rather, I explain the truth over here, they see the truth, they can apply it to themselves.